What if I told you that in a world chasing nuclear weapons, one young president did the unthinkable? He said no, not because he was weak, but because he was wise. This is the story the media barely covered. The story of Ibrahy Trari, Africa's youngest president, who chose peace over power and dared to imagine a future without fear, while generals demanded arms, while advisors promised strength through weapons. He looked into the eyes of his people and chose something far more dangerous. In today's world, principled leadership. In this video, we uncover the untold journey of a leader who rejected nuclear weapons, respected the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and redefined what it means to protect a nation with humanity, not with warheads. If you've ever asked, can peace still win in a world built for war? Stick around, because this story will move you, challenge you, and maybe restore your hope in real leadership. Let's begin. In a world obsessed with power, one man quietly chose peace, while many leaders flex military might, chase nuclear arsenals, and play high-stakes geopolitical chess. A young president from a landlocked African nation stunned the world by saying no to the unthinkable. This is not just a political decision. It's not a headline you scroll past on the evening news. It's the kind of story that makes you stop, pause, and think. Ibrahy Trari, the youngest president in Africa, and arguably the most unpredictable, made a choice that may one day define a generation. While allies whispered in his ear and military advisors urged him to level the playing field, he turned away from the nuclear option. He didn't hesitate because he was naive. He didn't reject the idea because he was weak. He did it because he understood something most people in power forget. He understood that peace is a strength, not a weakness. He understood that true leadership isn't about fear. It's about vision. Let that sink in for a second. When you're the head of state in a volatile region, surrounded by coups, extremist threats, and global pressure, and someone offers you the ultimate deterrent, nuclear weapons, what do? Most would say yes. Most would see the weapons as leverage, as security, as a way to earn a permanent seat at the global table. But Trari, he looked at his people. He looked at their hopes, their fears, their future, and he chose humanity over hegemony, respect over retaliation, stability over spectacle. He stood up, not just to the advisors in the room, but to the echo chamber of global ambition. And he did something almost unheard of in modern leadership. He honored the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. He embraced it, not out of obligation, but out of conviction. Because to him, protecting his nation meant more than brandishing missiles. It meant rejecting fear and choosing something far more difficult: hope. This story isn't just about Bokhina Fasho. It's about what kind of world we're building and what kind of leaders we need. So let's pull back the curtain. Let's step inside the mind of this undercover leader, the man who quietly redefined what power really means. This is the untold story of Ibrahy Trari, and it starts with a decision the world almost missed, but one we can no longer afford to ignore. Behind every bold decision lies an invisible weight, and for President Ibrahy Trari, that weight came in the form of relentless pressure. From allies, from generals, from foreign advisors, from history itself. When Trari stepped into power, he didn't inherit just a country. He inherited a battlefield. Bokhina Fasho was and still is at the crossroads of instability. Terrorist groups lurk at its borders. Internal factions stir unrest. The shadow of colonial influence still haunts its politics, and then there's the chessboard of global interests. Superpowers looking for strategic footholds, alliances shifting like desert winds. In this storm, many voices whispered the same word: nuclear. Not as an attack, not as an act of aggression, but as a shield, an equalizer. A silent warning that says, don't mess with us. Advisors painted vivid pictures. Imagine the deterrence, they said. Imagine the leverage. If North Korea can command attention with nukes, why not us? If other nations can rise through power, Why shouldn't we? It wasn't just hypothetical. There were meetings. There were offers, some subtle, some not. Defense contracts came with fine print. Foreign advisors hinted at long-term security solutions. And behind closed doors, global allies began floating the unspoken question. Would Burkina Faso consider going nuclear? For a moment, the possibility felt real. After all, this was more than geopolitics. This was survival. A nuclear arsenal could be a game-changer in a region where instability is the rule, not the exception. Traoré listened. He asked questions. He considered the implications. Because true leadership isn't impulsive. It's intentional. But as the pressure mounted, he saw through the illusion. He saw the danger of trading one form of dependence for another. He realized what many overlook, that nuclear weapons don't just protect, they provoke, they isolate, they escalate. And for a nation trying to rise, not just defend, the cost of such power might outweigh the gain. Still, turning down that path wasn't easy. The people wanted strength. The military wanted deterrence. Foreign partners wanted alignment. Saying no meant risking political backlash. Meant walking away from potential deals, investments, influence. It meant vulnerability. But Ibrahim Traoré wasn't afraid of vulnerability. Because vulnerability is the birthplace of authenticity. And sometimes, to protect your people, you have to say no to what looks powerful so you can say yes to what is right. That's what makes this story so rare, so powerful, and so important to tell. Because in a world where leaders often chase bigger weapons, here was a young president daring to walk the other way, into the unknown and into history. Every nation faces a moment where it must choose power or principle. Ibrahim Traoré chose principle. And in doing so, he surprised not just his advisors, but the entire international community, because when offered a seat at the nuclear table, he didn't just walk away from the invitation. He turned toward something bigger, something older, something the world had started to forget: the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, signed in 1968, adopted by over 190 countries, and built on one powerful idea: that the spread of nuclear weapons must stop. That peace is not just possible, but essential. But here's the truth. In today's world, the NPT is often ignored, bent, stretched, manipulated. Some nations sign it, then seek loopholes. Others violate it, without consequence. So when a young leader from West Africa said, "I will honor this treaty, fully," it wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. Traoré didn't do it for applause. He didn't hold a press conference or stage a photo op. He did it quietly. But his decision spoke louder than any missile test ever could. It said, "My people come first." It said, "Our future will not be built on fear." And it said, Burkina Faso will not be bullied into becoming what it is not. By upholding the NPT, Traoré sent a message, one that resonated far beyond his borders. He reminded the world that restraint is not weakness, that honoring international law is not naive, that in a time of rising tensions and nuclear brinkmanship, choosing peace takes more courage than choosing war. He knew the risks. Other nations might see Burkina Faso as less powerful, less threatening, less strategically important. But Traoré didn't care about optics. He cared about outcomes. And the outcome he envisioned? A Burkina Faso that thrives through innovation, not intimidation. A nation that rises through energy, education, and unity, not uranium enrichment. He didn't reject nuclear technology altogether, but he made a crucial distinction. Weapons destroy, energy builds. And that difference, simple, yet profound, is at the heart of his leadership. So while others stockpile, he safeguards. While others escalate, he educates. And while others forget their promises, he keeps his. In the annals of diplomacy, some leaders make deals, others make headlines. But a rare few, like Ibrahim Traoré, make history, not with noise, but with integrity, not with force, but with faith. Faith in treaties, faith in people, and faith in peace. Saying no to nuclear weapons didn't mean saying no to nuclear power. In fact, it opened a new door, a different kind of strength, one built not on destruction, but on development. When Ibrahy Trari looked to the future of Burkina Faso, he didn't see missiles in silos. He saw homes with electricity, hospitals with steady power, schools lit up after dark, factories running without interruption. That's where nuclear energy comes in. Not as a threat, but as a tool to lift a nation out of energy poverty. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, struggles with electricity shortages. Entire regions live in the dark. Business growth stalls. Students study by candlelight, and modern healthcare becomes nearly impossible without reliable power. Traoré knew that fixing this wasn't just an infrastructure issue. It was a matter of dignity, of progress, of giving every citizen a shot at a better life. So instead of spending billions on weapons of war, he turned to peaceful nuclear technology. In 2023, Burkina Faso signed a major agreement with Russia, not for weapons, but for energy. Together, they planned the construction of the country's first nuclear power plant, a bold move, one that would mark a turning point in the nation's history. Critics raised eyebrows, but Traoré was clear. This is not about geopolitics. It's about people, and he meant it, because while others chase headlines with defense budgets, Traoré chased kilowatts, electricity that can change lives, create jobs, empower farmers, strengthen industries, and give future generations a fighting chance. He wasn't alone in this vision. Across Africa, countries are beginning to explore peaceful nuclear energy, but few have made the leap as boldly as Burkina Faso, and almost none with such clarity of purpose. It wasn't just about building a power plant. It was about building trust. Traoré worked to ensure transparency, to involve international regulatory bodies, to follow every guideline, every protocol, every safety check. Because for him, this wasn't just science, it was stewardship. Handling something as powerful as nuclear energy required humility, responsibility, and a commitment to doing it right. In a world where nuclear headlines usually mean danger, Traoré gave the word a new meaning, hope, possibility, and perhaps a blueprint for others to follow. Because the truth is, nuclear power, used wisely, can be a force for good, and in the hands of leaders like Ibrahy Trari, just might light the way, not with fire, but with vision. Saying no to nuclear weapons is noble. But let's be honest, it doesn't make life easier, especially when your country sits in the heart of West Africa, a region plagued by armed insurgencies, terrorist groups, and political unrest. Burkina Faso faces threats on all sides. Extremists target rural villages. Illegal arms flow across porous borders. Foreign interests maneuver in the shadows. And all the while, the nation fights to hold on to its sovereignty. For Ibrahy Traoré, rejecting nuclear weapons didn't make those dangers disappear. If anything, it made him more vulnerable, more exposed, and more determined. Because this wasn't a fantasy of peace. It was a choice to defend without destroying, to protect without provoking, and that required creativity, discipline, and courage. Instead of building weapons of mass destruction, Traoré invested in strengthening local defense forces. He launched reforms to modernize Burkina Faso's military, trained soldiers, equipped rural security, outposts focused on rapid response and intelligence gathering. Not flashy, not headline-grabbing, but smart and grounded in the reality of Burkina Faso's needs. He also leaned into regional alliances, building trust with neighboring countries. Sharing information, coordinating counterterrorism efforts. Because Traoré understood something many leaders miss, that security isn't just about what you hold. It's about who stands with you when things go wrong. Still, not everyone was happy. Some Foreign powers, used to pulling strings behind the scenes, found themselves shut out. Others questioned his motives. Why would a country in crisis reject global military aid? Why would a president in danger refuse the ultimate protection? But Traoré stayed firm, because accepting certain deals often comes with invisible chains. And for a young president trying to rebuild national identity, sovereignty wasn't just a slogan. It was a mission. He began reshaping the narrative, from dependency to dignity, from desperation to self-determination. He spoke directly to the people, made decisions with long-term consequences in mind, and above all, refused to compromise the country's soul for short-term security. Of course, the road wasn't easy. Attacks still happened. Criticism poured in. But step by step, trust began to grow. Citizens saw a leader who wasn't hiding behind walls, but walking among them, one who valued their safety, but also their independence, who wasn't selling fear, but building resilience, and maybe, just maybe, that's more powerful than any warhead. Because real security doesn't come from what you threaten. It comes from what you protect, and who you empower. And for Traoré, that's always been the people. No bold move goes unnoticed, and Ibrahim Traoré's decision to reject nuclear weapons was anything but quiet on the world stage. The international community watched closely. Some applauded, others whispered. A few raised their eyebrows. In peace organizations across the globe, there was a ripple of hope. Finally, a leader who stood for something more than power. Finally, a head of state who said no to fear and yes to the future. The United Nations praised the reaffirmation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Environmental groups voiced their support. Energy experts highlighted Bokhina Faso's potential as a model for responsible nuclear use. But not all voices were so kind. Behind diplomatic miles, some world powers questioned his motives. Was Traoré truly committed to peace? Or was this just another geopolitical play? Some skeptics painted him as naive, too idealistic, too young to understand the real game of global politics. They warned, without nuclear weapons, Burkina Faso could become an easy target, a nation with no teeth in a world of predators. Others worried about the Russia connection. Could peaceful energy today lead to something more dangerous tomorrow? Traoré didn't flinch. He addressed the concerns head-on. Transparent, clear, unapologetic. This is not about alignment, he said. This is about advancement. His message was simple. Burkina Faso wasn't choosing sides. It was choosing sanity. It wasn't signing up for war. It was signing on to the future. And in doing so, Traoré gained unlikely allies. Small nations struggling with energy poverty found inspiration in his path. Academic communities began citing Burkina Faso as a case study in alternative security thinking. And in quiet rooms in Washington, Brussels, and Beijing, some policymakers took notice. They may not have agreed, but they respected the resolve. Because in a world where political capital is often spent on escalation, here was a leader who spent his on de-escalation, where others bought silence with arms. He earned respect with restraint. Still, challenges remain. The global stage is never stable, and leaders who walk away from the norm often walk alone. But Traoré seems ready for that. He's not chasing applause. He's not asking to be admired. He just wants a safer, stronger Burkina Faso. And maybe, just maybe, his quiet revolution is louder than we think, because it's easy to launch missiles. It's much harder to launch trust. It's easy to join the arms race. It's far braver to walk away. And in doing so, Traoré didn't just shift the narrative. He challenged the very definition of leadership, not through might, but through meaning. History doesn't always remember the quiet ones, the ones who choose restraint over reaction, dignity over drama. But sometimes it should. Because the story of Ibrahim Traoré is more than a headline. It's more than a political move. It's a blueprint. For a different kind of leadership, one that doesn't rely on missiles to make a point, one that doesn't need explosions to be heard. In a world constantly pulled toward extremes, this young president stood in the center and chose calm, chose clarity, chose peace, and in doing so, he gave his people something rare in today's world, a future without fear, a vision without violence. It wasn't the easy path, it wasn't the popular path, but it was the right one. And that's what real leadership looks like. Not just making decisions, but making the right ones when it's hardest, when the pressure is loud, when the room is full of powerful voices, when saying no could cost you everything, but also save everything that matters. Traoré didn't sign away his country's soul for short-term safety. He didn't build his reputation on war, he built it on wisdom. He proved that courage isn't about confrontation, it's about conviction. He didn't hide behind weapons, he stood in front of them and said no. And for that, he may have written a new chapter in global leadership, one that doesn't begin with nuclear arms, but with open hands, one that replaces threats with trust, suspicion with strategy, fear with hope. And now, the world is watching, some with curiosity, some with admiration, some with skepticism still in their eyes. But all are watching, because deep down we know that the path Traoré is walking could lead somewhere new, somewhere better, and while it's still early, and while challenges remain, he's already left a mark, not just on Burkina Faso, but on the very idea of what it means to lead in the 21st century. Maybe one day other leaders will look back and realize they don't need to shout to be heard. They don't need to arm to be strong. They just need to care deeply enough to choose people over power, peace over pride, and purpose over politics. That's the legacy Ibrahy Trari is building, not with weapons but with will, not with fear but with faith, in his people, in peace, and in the possibility. That leadership, real leadership, can change the world. In a world fueled by division, one leader chose unity. In an era of escalating threats, he chose a softer power, the kind of power that doesn't intimidate, but inspires. Ibrahy Trari didn't just lead his people. He honored them. He protected them without ever pulling a trigger. He reminded the world that real strength doesn't come from the size of your arsenal, but from the size of your heart. If that moved you, if it stirred something deeper, a longing for better leaders, for a braver kind of politics, then don't let this story end here. Share it. Because stories like this, they're not just content, they're a call to action. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a spark, to believe again, to care again, to lead with love, not fear. And if even one more person sees this, one more heart feels this, then maybe, just maybe, peace has already begun to win. Thanks for watching. And remember, the wisest, most powerful weapon is a leader who chooses not to use one.